My name is Chon Noriega, and I'm a curator of two of the works that you see in the area around here. The first one is on the other side of those bleachers by Daniel Martinez. And you can see it's got a five-line title. If you drink hemlock, I shall drink it with you. A beautiful death, player to player, pimp to pimp, as performed by the inmates of the asylum of Carlton, and I can't read that part, under the direction of the Marquis de Sade. I think that says it all. I encourage you to go see the piece, which is a restaging as a sculpture of the death of Marat by David in 1793, only months after Marat had been assassinated. And the figures are using the body of the artist. Our other piece has a one-word title called Threshold, and you can see the top portion of it behind us here as the facade of the Bogota train station in Colombia. And the artist, Leyla Cárdenas, is here with me, and we're going to have a discussion about that and some of the other works that she's been working on that are dealing with public space, with architecture, with the idea of archaeology, and the sense of history that emerges out of these sites. Now, we're kind of kicking around how to start, and I think maybe we can just start with some specific work. And this is not working. Oh. Well, we're loading some video as well, so. Can I go to one of the slides? Okay. So this work here also has a one-word title, Excision, from 2012. And it's a 4.72-inch slice of the room of a home built in Colombia in the 1880s, which is around the time that the nation formed. And everything is cut down to that slice. And I recently, it was recently in a show here in Los Angeles called Home, So Different, So Appealing, and really helped myself and the other two curators really think through what we were trying to get at in terms of taking a different look at home rather than a nostalgic one, or the one in which the home very and too easily equates with the nation. Here in the US, there was this phrase coming out of, I think, the First World War called "for home and country." And the only thing left out of that is basically one is willing to die for home and country, and that to equate these two. Now, Leyla, maybe we just start here with the fact of Colombia. You're an amazing artist whose work is shown around the world. You've been involved with research groups in Europe, and your work has really, in some sense, traveled many places. But it seems as though it comes back very directly to a question about Colombia, and in particular going back to that early moment in the 1880s, where the nation is forming, but it never quite fully forms. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Sean, for the invitation, and to all you for being here. Well, yes, it's a question that I often ask myself, but I think when I started these excavations, because they are very archaeological in the process, there's somehow something of a discovery in this process. And in the discovery, what I found out is that if you start digging on 19th century Colombia, it never leaves you alone. So actually, it's the 19th century is the one that is chasing me instead of me chasing things from the 19th century. It's inevitable. So there are many works that are involved in that period of time, and also a focus on this moment, not only architecturally, but politically, what was going on. Or better, to put it in a better way, is how architecture has led me to think about all these other layers that were making this idea of a nation more and more complicated. Of course, there are many issues involved here. And it's interesting to see how, from a micro perspective, from a little piece of wall that you can take and understand these layers accumulated behind, then you start going actually deeper as well in political philosophical and nation and more macro level problems about being a country or having these kind of problems with identity or what it is to be a country, a nation, etc.
Now, in the arts, this idea of an archaeology of the present kind of emerges in the 1960s, and you're very much a part of that genealogy of using the arts as a form of archaeology. But what I want to get at before we move on from this piece is you're kind of flipping it around, because the archaeologist digs and digs and digs and finds a little fragment, and then from that fragment reconstructs an entire vase and tells you what the culture meant as a whole. You're kind of going in the other direction. Why did you take a 5-inch slice? You could have saved the whole room if you had enough money. Why was it important to only save a fragment and to really make people live with that fragment?
Right. I think it has to do with that macro level I was talking about before. But I think also there's a state of fragility in everything surrounding me. And I think that's why maybe Bogota is so inspiring to me, and it's a good place to have as a center for my work, because it's a lesson, it's a continuous lesson about time and about how ephemeral everything is and how unstable everything is. So one of the few things I knew from the beginning was that this piece needed to be like a sample, almost a scientific sample. If I could have gone a little bit less
thinner,
more thinner, I could have done it. But because yes, I don't know why. It was an intuition that I had from the beginning that I needed this to be just a little sample. Yeah. And the wallpaper was beautiful. I wanted to have a whole piece just of this wallpaper that was incredibly well preserved among the years, but that would have been a different piece. I guess there was something about this cut, making it transversal, that was really a tool to make you see and wonder and reconstruct the whole.
Now, you're part of a wave of artists over the last 50 years who are taking whole things and making fragments, while archaeologists were finding fragments and turning them into stories of wholeness. But at a certain point in the last 5 to 10 years, archaeologists start saying, wait a minute, as we're being asked to do archaeological digs on genocides, we're never going to find a wholeness. And they start talking to artists. And you've been part of an effort going back, 5 years at the Van Eyck Institute, where you've been in dialogue with archaeologists. And what's that discussion like? Are they?
It's very interesting because we share many things with archaeology. Like artists and archaeologists, I think we find a common ground in dialogue and in intellectual interests. The way we think about the past, that is never actually the past. It's impossible to always, for example, these fragments that you find and this material that I work with, it's true. There's nothing fake about it. It's not a reconstruction. It's actually a slice of time. And they have that same, and that's a big responsibility in a way. When you put it on display and you give visibility to this past, the whole framework or the whole, the whole infrastructure that goes behind that effort, it's very interesting, in terms of everything. How you speak about it in terms of language, how you put it in the present, understanding that the present is just one more slice of this onion. So this research has been really, really interesting to find common ground and also possibilities of maybe making the archaeologists a little bit more playful with the material that they have, because they tend to be super rigorous and serious, and of course we are as well as artists, but we can be more playful with this material that we encounter in daily life, and we have an approach that is, of course, informed by other things. So this was a very interesting conversation that I think it won't stop. It will keep going because there were so many things coming out of our common interests.
And going back to the question of Colombia and why your work focuses on the 1880s going forward, I mean, it is a nation that the first 4 decades in particular are very unstable. But in some ways, you can say the entire history of the nation state has been one marked by instability as well as swings back and forth between different, between authoritarian and more democratic governments. Your work seems to be very particular to that, and yet something like this, over 130,000 people saw that work, about twice what usually happens in an exhibition when it was at LACMA, and it makes immediate sense. They connect to it in some way. And I'm wondering about that in terms of your own lineage, just to kind of to put that out there. I mean, one of your teachers is Doris Salcedo, who's probably one of the more widely recognized artists in the world. Not from Colombia, just in the world.
Well, she was not my teacher, my mentor, but...
Your mentor.
But yeah.
That's better than teachers.
Yeah.
And one of her teachers was Beatriz Gonzalez, who is right there at the beginning of pop art as it's coming into dialogue with Bogota. And I'm just wondering about, and who identifies herself as a provincial artist. So I'm not making universal statements. I'm making very concrete statements about the circulation of imagery in my city. So I'm wondering something about that dialogue between the very particular interest and what it gets at beyond that particular history.
Yeah.
Or is it just, that's a yes?
I don't know if I can say much more about that idea, but definitely there's a connection with the precariousness of everything, you know?
Yeah.
If you see Beatriz Gonzalez, it's very sophisticated, but she started in a very precarious quote. Doris as well, with the materiality and physicality and the emphasis she puts in this, the weight of materials and the metaphorical weight that they carry. So I think, and thank you as well for putting me in conversation with these two amazing artists that I really admire and I've learned a lot from. I think maybe I will use it as an invitation to bring you all back to Bogota and Colombia at some point and see some shows. There's amazing artists from many generations, and I think there's a very strong, I don't know, there's something going on there. I don't know. I don't know because I'm too immersed.
But it seems like it's also the site of one of the more interesting Warhol exhibitions, that there really was a context for it that moved beyond a kind of aestheticism or the kind of abstraction that gets applied to him in the arts a lot of times. Do we have the video of, can we show that? So you don't have to...
It's also the power of invisibility. Nobody was paying attention, so we just could do what we wanted in a way.
Yeah.
And that's similar to what happens in LA. LA is in a way as well tangential and on the edge of something. And I think that's a very interesting place to create from the edge.
So that leads to another connection, which is as I was doing research on you for the exhibition, I came across an MFA thesis that was done at UCLA in 2004, and it was yours. And you had John Baldessari, Chris Burden, Kathy Opie, Charles Ray signing off on your MFA thesis. I thought, wow. Can you say a little bit about being at UCLA, being in Los Angeles as you were getting your one aspect of your formal art education?
Well, can we go back to the first image actually, because that's the perfect way.
Which one?
The one with the peeling, the whites.
Okay.
The white peelings. Well, LA was a very interesting place to be. For me, a little hard at the beginning because I couldn't find. I was working.
Is it this one?
Before that one.
One more?
This one.
Yeah.
I was working with these ruins and images from the past, and LA. It's very hard to find here a connection with the past, at least from architecture or from ¿cómo se dice? Vestigios. Remnants, actually.
Yeah, remnants, yeah.
There are no many remnants lying around.
Well, as a country and then as a city, there's not a deep history
exactly.
here that we attach to, that we connect to.
Actually, but there is.
There is, but we don't connect to it.
Exactly, and I found that very interesting and an interesting source of material. And I think one of the biggest lessons for me being in that school was that I will really have to dig for this history if I really wanted to find it. So this example is one of these diggings. It's a very, not an actual dig or an excavation, but it's an excavation of the wall of a space that, of course, has this kind of palimpsest of many layers of paint accumulated. And I was kind of reading these images or these found paintings for its accumulation of time, like as documents and as archives. Somehow this work that started here in Los Angeles, peeling, you know, like very, out of this necessity of finding a connection with its past, of the city's past, or memories or histories, got me to this work, and then to the next work, and then somehow the work that you saw of the wallpaper is completely related to that process that started right here. And as well, thanks to these conversations with the amazing faculty that was at UCLA. I don't know if they were getting too much what I was doing, because none of them have work that connects to the past or to memory. No,
That's a pretty good point. Yeah.
So it was hard.
They're very much about surfaces and images.
Yes. Why are you focusing so much on the past? What is this nostalgia of yours? And I'm like, I'm not a nostalgic. I have nothing to be nostalgic about, because it's more. It's not thinking about a glorious past, but an incapacitated present. What I'm interested in.
I love the idea of doing an excavation in a city that doesn't think it has a history.
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit about what is it we're looking at? How are they suspended?
These are suspended from the floor and from the wall. So there's a map reconstructing, but it's actually an architectural peeling of paint and just leaving visible what used to be hidden against the wall. But somehow it's the way a tree works as well, painting houses. They accumulate layers and they grow over the years, but it's this unconscious work that we're doing all the time, having these surfaces accumulate somehow things, like randomly. And it's always this surprise of what is going to happen when you peel it and scratch and see what is behind it.
So you've kind of, and you're not alone in this in terms of Colombian artists and intellectuals, have this historiographical framework of a past that has never left and a future that has never arrived.
Yeah.
And that being caught in between. So is it really, can you really break it down to, in being in LA, you suddenly saw the absence of that historical awareness and began looking for it? Is that kind of...
Absolutely, yeah.
And then when you went back to Colombia, what happened? You're coming back with some preoccupations developed in an American framework, but you're back in an environment you're very familiar with. How did that change your work at that point?
I guess it made me wonder what would happen if I go deeper. So of course there was this very intuitive process that I was doing with the paint and with peeling materials, but that started to be as well a way of working, a very interesting way of working. And the research was taking me into archives. The photos and the images were taking me to books and specific texts. So of course this started to grow into a way of researching. But it was it just started with these peels of paint.
And in this
so it was a metaphorical approach that took me to an intellectual approach. So it's something that now happens organically, but I think it was a big lesson coming from Los Angeles, and how to think about time as well.
And with this piece, you're actually pulling out different layers of wallpaper that represent different patterns of different colonial powers.
Absolutely.
And the furniture itself is also from different colonial periods and different colonial regimes. And what's interesting is you're not alone in that. You see that in Puerto Rican art, you see it in Argentinian art. That's the material reality that people lived with, was expressed through the design and the decor of their home, right? So do we have the video? Can we show that? We'll actually say a little bit about this piece, the piece that's here that you can go see afterwards.
with my work, everything's on cycles. Like, you know, it repeats itself. The same obsessions, solved different. But
This was just a little video this morning when we were desperately trying to get the air conditioner turned off. I thought I'd document how it's not supposed to be blowing quite like that. But this is the facade of the National Train Station in Bogota, which was started in the 1880s, I believe.
yes, it was. But the building is from 1913 until 1917.
Yeah, so between 1913 and 1917, it actually comes into existence. And you have you've printed the image on a series of veils that have different widths. And what I was really intrigued with is that what you were conveying was the different gauges of the tracks that made up the national train system,
Yeah.
which made it an impossible national train system because there was no interconnectivity.
Exactly. It's a very subtle element, but it's fundamental that is there, no? That we have this, the piece is impossible, and the image is impossible, and the system was impossible.
And yet the idea behind it was this brings our nation together. And so it's the impossibility of something, and yet it's physically there. It's still, the building is still present 100 years later. What has it come to mean, and why, what were your interests in terms of foregrounding that as an image to look at?
I was looking for a building. I didn't know which building it should be because I think I've documented most of this period architecture in the city. So when I found it, it was a real good surprise. But I forgot, I don't think anybody has this building in its memory. No, like I'm surprised that it's still up, that we haven't demolished it because, of course, we don't have trains anymore. So this is a shell for something that doesn't exist. And
What's it used for now?
it is used for a tourist train on the weekends. So somehow a little reminder of the past. And it has the offices of the police as well. The police has some of the offices and a display of the cars of the museum. So the cars that you see there are actually on the inside of the building. That is very strange, but I guess it has this museum kind of tone to it, the lobby of the station. But it's finally this big threshold that won't take you anywhere. No, that's the tragedy of the image.
So what's interesting is when you're looking at it on either side, you're actually seeing the reversed image. So the lettering is backwards.
You're seeing the reversed image, and you're seeing the inside of the outside and the outside of the inside.
So you can never actually be inside. Even if you walk through the center, you're in this impossible space, right?
Exactly. So it was I was really lucky to find the building and to be able to photograph it. And it's a perfect subject, actually. It has all these little signs that tell you many things, like an image that you really have to read, and I keep reading and finding clues that are very subtle, but are important, that are there, no? Like the coat of arms of the country. In the middle, it's hard to tell, but there's a little dove sitting in the belly of the condor of Los Andes that I found fascinating because it's our national emblem. And then dove is there, like super elegant and positioned. I don't know, there are many things about this image that I really like. And I think I found a new way of exploring these subjects, and also the materiality and the ghost-like presence of it. It's a new way to go.
Yeah, I'm intrigued because there are other artists who work with that idea of marking out space, but you're actually marking out a relationship to space by way of the image. So it can be, it's an impossible space. It can be a non-Euclidean kind of
I like
mapping,
that.
Yeah. Can we maybe go through some of the other images on this slide here and just give a broader sense of your work? And if you want to just offer some commentary.
This is the photograph also of a facade of a Republican building that was being, it was a ruin as well. It was completely empty on the inside, so it was just this facade that was standing up. So I recollected demolition debris from all over the city and glued the photograph, trying to reconstruct this space, but of course it was impossible to reconstruct. But it's a little echo of what's happening here as well, formally, this decision of making the image not completely standing up, but fading into the ground. No?
It's interesting because I think we have this idea of the individual with an unconscious and of societies with a history that nothing is ever lost. And I think what really fascinating about your work and other artists working in this vein is you're really bringing forward the fact that no, something is lost. You can understand the contours of it, but you'll never bring it back. And
this is more the skeleton of something. No, it's made with I don't know. It's like a mesh where you. How do you build walls and
with the rebar kind of scaffolding?
Foundation? Yeah. Exactly. But it was interesting in this, like it was bare, right? The bones of the space. Of course, it had to do with the building where this piece was exhibited. It's always a conversation about the building and the site specificity of the place. This also is a downtown Bogota old theater that became the stage for this actually the image of a bridge that's been embroidered into this very thin mesh, like a ghost as well, and as well a predecessor for this kind of work with the fabric.
It's interesting, doing this show this year, for various reasons, I have spent more time in the area. And I share with you that sense of LA as a place without a history. But walking around here, once you get past the Staples Center, it has that sense of, it may only go back 100, 120 years, but you're very conscious of all of the different time frames that are patched together that make up the present. And I think that, these kind of investigations within a space that people may have written off, but the way in which you bring them back into it. Now this is
more examples of of more recent work. This is work made as well with the same material over there.
The veil.
And I'm really fascinated with breaking the weaving. So I take away one of the threads that what is a trama? I forgot the name.
I forget which is the
for trama, sorry. If someone knows the word in English, when you have a weaving, what is a trama? A weave? No.
It's the.
So I take away like one of the threads and the rest stays, and I'm fascinated that the image is still there, holding by a thread, literally. So this is erosion caused by the city, a little bit different, but it's somehow to make a city you have to erode the mountain or take away the mountain. The mountain decays and the city grows, but at the same time when there's demolition and the transformation of cities, the city as well becomes these mountains of rubble and everything starts all over again. So this is actually an image that is also this reflection and this mirror cycle that repeats itself. It's a palimpsest. The name of the piece is Somos o no somos. You can read it the same way from the beginning or to the end. And the piece as well is this palimpsest. The image is reflected, and it's a never-ending story. It's like a, as well like a freezing of time, if you want. It's an example of going deeper. I'm bringing the soil of the underneath the museum into the surface. This was done last year at LACMA in Orange County at the Triennial for Pacific. I forgot the name. California Pacific Triennial. And since it was the last exhibition happening at this sede, at this location.
At the museum there.
They are moving.
Yeah.
So the curator decided to invite artists that deal with this state of things and with architecture and with time, of course. So this is ground from underneath the floor, and it's made in a way, it's called tierra pisada. And I just forgot the English as well for this. It's
Something.
like a tapia.
Yeah.
When you just accumulate dirt and you press it so it holds. So it's one of the first ways of constructing.
Yeah.
So in a way, this disrupts the space of the gallery, and there's also little lines of Pleistocene sand that I was able to get with a local archaeologist. So it's actually a stratigraphy of the unconscious of the museum. I like to think of that, of it in that way.
It's a nice send-off for it.
And this was done in the Netherlands in the space of a previous factory. So what is printed on the screens is actually the ghosts of what the building used to occupy. Sometimes these shapes that are beside buildings when it is demolished, and you leave just this ghost image of how it used to, or the space it used to occupy. But it was interesting because this was the office of the owner. Like Maastricht is the city where this was exhibited, is what it is because of its industrial past. And somehow digging into the history of this building is digging into this industrial past that is now gone.
So I want to open it up for questions. We have
Please.
a few more minutes if anyone has any questions for the artist. Otherwise, I'll have plenty of them, but any art historians in the front row? Well, don't ask Charlene, ask the artist.
No pressure.
We were looking at the piece that's here and thinking about the piece in the home show and thinking about how both of them were organized around this idea of slice, right? And we didn't really notice it until we walked through the two scrims. So I wondered if you would say a few words about that. Is that a connection or?
I didn't notice before. So thank you for that reading. Seriously. I didn't thought of these pieces as slice, but of course it is. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if we can jump that into a historical register and just ask about Gordon Matta Clark. His building cuts and slices and his having read a lot of what he had to say about his work, his interests were much more abstract and formal. But there's something that he's doing that disrupts the idea of the unity of an architectural structure that your work is also getting at. So I don't know, was he an influence, a point of reference, something you tried to reject?
No, of course, it was a reference point all the time. But recently I understood as well much more about his context, the context where he was working while he was doing these cuts, and it was a context. It was completely a different New York, like a different city. He was, occupying buildings, and they were appropriating these spaces for art and galleries and restaurants for free food, and so it was a very political and an economical approach to architecture that I don't have. And it was
And he's treated so much as a global, universal figure, but he's dealing with very nuts and bolts issues taking place in New York City. So
exactly.
He's
you
buying
really
up these little fragments of space that get left out of, and claiming ownership of those parcels.
But you have to understand the state of
Precarity
that was New York at that point, and what it became. So it's so interesting to see him as this figure doing that kind of work in that point in history, economically and politically. It's so interesting. It becomes a completely different. The splits are almost anecdotal for everything else that was going on. It was more the performatic aspect of his work.
Because we included him in the home exhibition with the full understanding that most people don't realize he's a U.S. Latino artist. His father was Roberto Mata, the preeminent Chilean surrealist artist. And we did that not because of any sense of identity per se, but because that is part of the natural history of this hemisphere. And he was very much engaged in it at a very particular moment and place and time. So, any other questions? Yes.
Okay. When you think of destruction, things that are, or entropy, things that die, think of a more violent image. But this is a sense of fragility, something that persists in time, but very, very fragile. And the images itself, when even without any contextual information, they shimmer and they're quite beautiful. You can just respond to just the image itself.
Yeah.
But behind it, knowing that it's reflecting a sense of its persistence in time, but reflecting a sense of things that were destroyed, no longer there, but still persisting. It changes the way you experience the architecture itself.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
And that's a very universal concept as well, right? It's like we share it. It doesn't matter where you come from.
Any last questions for the artist? John.
The way it's displayed, it's photographed, the floor begins to grow on me anyway as I watch it. And I see it has some of the patterns of the laid out architecture. I don't know what to call it. The piece that is lying on what I gather is the gallery floor there, but the gallery floor becomes, especially the right-hand side, has its own buffing, and somebody's been working on that floor even.
Yeah.
I mean, is this just an accident of the photograph, or is this?
Yeah, the photograph is mixing what is underground and what is overground. So the construction is both, because it was, of course, playing with this idea of how archaeologists think of time. And they usually think of a time that is going down, so it's vertical time. So I was wondering if I'm thinking of an horizontal time when I'm looking into the walls or different surfaces, or if they can be interchanged. Like if you go deep and underground, maybe you'll find something that is actually from yesterday, no? So this ambiguity of time is what I was interested in. And then what you have on the photograph is a house, but as well a digging on the mine of the city. This is a mine where they extract cement and I don't know what else from the soil.
But
So
I guess
it's
what's really interesting about
quarry.
all of these works is that they're in situ, they're in a place.
Yeah, and they are
And the
informed by the place.
And the design and the layout of that begins to dialogue rather than abstracting the image or the object as something to contemplate in isolation. The kind of traditional notion of art in the white cube. And I think that's a very powerful element of the work, is that it's very embedded within a space. Well, I think what we'll do is wrap up, thank the artist for her time. I'll say that we'll be over by the artwork. If you have any questions for her for the next few minutes, you get a chance to see the work and engage with her one-on-one or two-on-one. But yes, thank you, Leyla.
Thank you, Chon.